Hey guys, welcome back to the Laidback Homestead. I'm Crystal, and today we've got some chores to do. I need to water pretty much everything because it's super hot. And I want to check on our seeds we started a few days ago in the bag to see if we've had any luck with germination with the squash. And I want to harvest some worm poop. So let's get started. So anyone who's watched any of my past videos knows how much I love my pre-composter. And it up and died on me. I don't know what's wrong with it, but it's no longer making the pre-compost. So now everything has to either go to my worms or into my tumbler. So one of the chores I needed to get done today was moving all of my compostable things into the tumbler since my pre-composter decided to up and quit its job. So a small garden update. I have another bag with wilt, which I guess I'm not surprised because that bag, no, that one, and that one. And if I had to guess this one, but the beets just aren't bothered by it. So I don't have anything else in there. But yeah, I had planted peanuts in here to test for the wilt, and the squirrels got them. It's just a leftover shell. So they came and they dug up every one of my peanuts that I planted except for one. They left me one peanut and it looks pretty frazzled. It's not doing great. So since right now I'm set to not have a peanut harvest, I'm thinking about pulling some of my self-wicking buckets that have tomatoes that the rats are all eating and maybe starting peanuts in my greenhouse so that the squirrels can't get them. Into the greenhouse. Ah, that nice fresh greenhouse. Everything's looking good. Oh wow, I've already had germination. So I ended up putting my seeds in here just to keep them protected from the elements outside. I didn't want them blowing around. So we're gonna check on them and see if they're ready to be up-potted or planted out, or if they're duds. All right, so first up, I've got the early prolific here. These seeds were 5 years old, and it's been about 2 days, 3 days. I should have dated the bag. That would have made the most sense. Well, yeah, nothing. Nothing. I'm thinking the 5-year-old seeds are probably ready to be purged, which is a shame because I had a lot of them left in the bag. So maybe I'll just give it a couple more days. Okay, so let's go ahead and check on the dwarf sunflowers. This was another really old pack of seeds. And, well, nothing that I see. There may be a couple that are trying to open, but nothing definitive. Maybe this one might come into play. So wrap those back up. And then the last ones, which were the newest seeds, the spineless beauty. Oh, wow. Well, okay. These are obviously past the point where you would want to be planting them out. So I'm going to go ahead and get those directly planted into grow bags in the greenhouse. So I'm in the greenhouse and I'm just going to very gently bury the roots. Now I'm not 100% sure if this will work just because, you know, squash doesn't really like to have its roots kind of messed with. So I'm leaving the tip of the seed hanging out. Let's see if that helps. Now these last two are kind of stuck in the paper towel. And so I'm just gonna rip the paper towel and plant it in the dirt. And hopefully by just keeping the roots from getting aggravated, maybe it'll grow. So you may have noticed when I did my big greenhouse reset clean out thing, I did not amend any of these bags, partly because I didn't really have much growing in them. But I've planted out some seeds, I planted out some transplants. So I want to go and harvest some of my vermicompost because I do like to let that sit for a while in a bucket so that if there's any cocoons that I accidentally harvest, they'll come out and then I can put them back in my worm tower. Not that losing a bunch of worms is a big deal. Worms repopulate really quickly, but I try to save all the babies that I can. And since here I don't have individual little worm towers like in my beds, I try to be a little bit more vigilant when I'm harvesting the vermicompost to come in the greenhouse. I've got worms, and today we are going to harvest and rotate up my trays. Okay, I'm gonna put my top off to the side because I use it as kind of a holding when I'm doing this. So this top layer, I'm not harvesting that. I'm really gonna be harvesting this, which I'm not seeing any active worms in because in the past I have been feeding the second and third tray over the last few weeks. So the worms have naturally wanted to migrate down where the food is since they're not really getting any of that here. So I'm looking, if I saw active worms, what I would do is I would let this sit without the top on for a while for them to migrate, but I don't see any in here. So I'm gonna go ahead and get my cleaned bucket and get to harvesting. I've just got a clean bucket here and I'm gonna start moving the castings into there. And if I see any worms while I'm doing this, I'll grab them. But like I said, this layer didn't seem to have a whole lot of activity. My castings are a little bit wet, which again, they're gonna sit in the bucket to dry. So as you can see, I scraped out the majority of the castings from this. And now this tray is going to become my bottom tray. So I am going to reset this and move it to the bottom of the stack. And all I'm doing to reset this is adding in some shredded paper and some brown paper bags. This bottom layer really just serves the purpose as a moisture barricade. So now that I have the bottom layer reset, I'm going to go ahead and move it off to the side. And I am actually going to harvest the castings from tray 2 as well. Normally I only harvest one at a time, but because I'm desperate for castings right now, I'm going to go ahead and do the 2 of them. Now the castings in the second layer are even more wet and there's significantly more worm activity in this tray because it had been getting fed really up until the last maybe week or so before I started feeding in the third tray. Now because I'm impatient, I am agitating the worms. You can see in my hand, the more you're moving them around, the more it encourages them to burrow down to the tray beneath them. If you didn't want to aggravate them, you could just let your tray sit out in the open with the lid off, and the light alone would kind of start to encourage them. Or in a perfect world, you would just keep feeding the third tray and wait for the worms to move on their own. But again, I'm kind of in a rush, so I'm just going to harvest it. Another thing to note here is that in this tray, not everything is completely broken down, and that's okay. I already compost in place, so I'm not really worried about it if things continue to break down in my beds. I'm just really eager to get the castings out, and as you can see, they're really sticky, but they will dry out in that bucket. So this part of the process can be time consuming if you're doing it the hands-on method like I am, and slowly moving the worms around. If you move them out to the open grates, they're much more likely to find their way in. Here I have a little cluster of worms, more than likely mating. So I'm just gonna leave them be and hopefully they will make their way out. So I decided to just leave the rest of this in here, and I'm going to go ahead and reset this tray as well, as the same way I did before. I'm gonna add in some shredded paper and some brown paper bags. And that's going to also encourage the worms to move to another tray just because it'll be a little dry. And once I'm satisfied with this tray, I'm going to move it off to the side, and you'll see my active feeding tray. Now you can see this is where the majority of the worm activity is, but this is not exactly what you would want to see. It's awfully wet in here. So I need to go ahead and add in some shredded paper as well as some more brown paper bags. And then I will go ahead and add in a big feed. And to make this less of a shock to the worms that I left in this tray, I went ahead and hit it with the hose just to give them a little bit of a moisture barrier. And today's feeding is leftover bananas and coffee grinds courtesy of my mom. And I do tend to feed heavily, but because I always have at least 2 layers for moisture barrier, I really never have any leachate. And this size feed will typically last my worms about a week or 2. So this layer is now done, and I'm going to move it off to the side so that I can rotate the bottom 2. So what I mean by this is trays 4 and 5 are now going to become trays 2 and 3, because this tray that we're looking at is going to become tray number 1. So the 2 that I have off in the background are going to be the new trays 4 and 5. So you can see old tray 4, which will now become, tray 2, is nothing but really a paper barrier. The same way as you saw me reset the last 2, that's exactly how these are. So to refresh this tray, I am adding in some paper towel rolls as well as some shredded paper. I've read in the past that the worms like to lay their cocoons in the cardboard rolls, so I always make sure I have a couple of layers with them in it. And now this layer is done, and we are looking at what is the very bottom layer currently, layer 5 or tray 5. And you can see that this layer is actually not that wet. It was mostly the cardboard rolls, paper towel rolls, and they seem to be doing a really good job of keeping the moisture out. So I'm just going to add in a little bit more of shredded paper, and this tray will be done. I went ahead and moved that last tray off to the side, and you can see this is just very bottom of the tower. That's where the leachate falls. And now I'm just going to stack them the way that I want them. So the first tray that we harvested today is now the very bottom tray, and I'm just making sure it's fitting securely on the base. And the second tray we harvested today is now the new tray number 4. And tray number 5 from today is now the new tray number 3. And then tray number 4 got moved up to tray number 2. And I was feeding on the original 3rd tray, and that is going to be our first tray. And I will feed on this tray until I see that we've built up a nice level of castings, and then we'll go through the rotating process again. Hopefully this wasn't too confusing. If it was, comment any questions down below. I'm sure I'll have further worm updates in the future. So this is our pile of castings. It filled up about a quarter of a 5-gallon bucket. And like I said, this is going to sit here to dry out for a few days. But just in case there are any worms in there or cocoons that eventually hatch, I'm going to go ahead and put in a cut cucumber. This will bait them to come to the top, and they'll be feeding on the cucumber if any of them are in there, and I'll be able to, pluck them off and put them back in the worm tower. Anything in the cucumber or melon family, they tend to really love. So I always use something in that family to kind of bait them if they are indeed living in the bucket. Well guys, thanks for hanging out with me. I appreciate your time. And until next time, stay blessed.